Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. So the idea of getting free press or media coverage has always mystified me. I've never pursued it, but then again, I haven't been sold on why I should. For example, you have no control over what gets published, when it gets published, or what's actually said, and you don't really have the ability to track the results, which may or may not materialize. So outside of the ability to honestly say that your business has been seen on a handful of media outlets, as we see on people's websites, it's really seemed like a poor use of my time. So with that being said, the right story on the right outlet, such as Oprah or Sharktank, can obviously launch a company to the moon. So with the pending launch of my hydroponics company later this year, my interest in the PR game has been renewed. And today we're joined by one of the best media strategists in the world to really crack the code on this and figure out how to do it right, Mr. Ryan Holiday. So if you're not familiar with Ryan, from 2008 to 2014, he was the director of marketing for American Apparel, where some absolutely outrageous PR campaigns that you're going to hear about today helped put the company on the map and are actually now being used as case studies by Twitter, YouTube, and Google. He's also the author of 3 books, including Growth Hacker Marketing, which reveals how a new generation of multi-billion-dollar brands was built without spending a dime on traditional marketing. And he was also the strategist behind the launch of Tucker Max's personal brand and Tim Ferriss's launch of the 4-Hour Workweek. In other words, Ryan is among the best of the best when it comes to media strategy, and I highly recommend that you check out his video course on the topic over at creativelive.com, which is called Smart PR for Artists and Entrepreneurs. I picked it up about a month ago, which is one of the reasons that I reached out to Ryan and got connected and definitely had to have him here on the podcast. So make sure you check that out. And with that being said, please help me welcome Ryan Holiday. Well, Ryan Holiday, welcome to my little humble abode here in Austin and Self-Made Man. Glad you're here, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great. I'm the first guest in your new place?
Yeah, I moved in literally 18 hours ago. So fortunately, we had a moving company that came in and did everything over a weekend. So you can walk in today and it looks like an actual house that somebody's been living in rather than, boxes everywhere. But internet was installed about 3 hours ago. So this worked out well. But yeah, really appreciate the time today and that we finally had a chance to connect since we're both here in Austin. And I've been, going, well, one, I went through your most recent book, The Obstacle is the Way, which was great about a year ago when it came out. Obviously, listened to all of your podcasts that you've done with Tim Ferriss and everybody else. So I'm familiar with your work and, what you've done at American Apparel. And so I wanted to see if you could take 10 to 15 minutes to go through your story for everyone in this audience who might not be familiar with your background.
Yeah, sure. So when I was 19 years old, this would have been before. So I was a big fan of a previous guest that you had on the show, Tucker Max. When I was in high school, I was a huge reader. I loved reading, and I found his stories online, and I thought they were hilarious. But he and I were very different people. His stories are about drinking and hooking up, and that was sort of not my life at all. I just thought he was this creative, interesting, provocative voice. I just fell in love with his stuff. And when I was in college, I followed him as his stuff blew up. And when I was in college, I wrote an article about him for the college newspaper. And after I was done, I thought, you know what? I wrote this article, I'm proud of it, and I sent it to him. And I had no idea what would happen. And he emailed me back 10 minutes later. And we sort of developed this relationship. I would email him when I have questions. And people think that mentorship is this sort of official, formal thing. Exactly. And really, it's something that develops over time, like an actual human relationship does, right? You don't walk up to a woman in a bar and be like, would you like to be my girlfriend? But that's what people do with mentorships. They say, I would like you to be my mentor. And then those messages get deleted. And so Tucker became this sort of mentor to me. And I started a blog and I was writing online, and through Tucker, people started to find that blog. Tucker got me a job in Hollywood one of the summers when I was in college, working for the management agency that was producing his movie. And then I also started working for Robert Greene, who wrote a book called The 48 Laws of Power, who I was as equally enthralled with as I was with Tucker. And all these things sort of converged when I was about 19 years old. And they asked me if I would want to keep working with them and not go back to school, which I'd not considered. I ended up making the leap. It was this very, scary, in some ways horrible time. But I dropped out of college. It ended up being one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. I slept on Tucker's floor for a year, basically. I slept on a mattress on his floor with his dogs. Tucker was struggling himself then as well. We lived in this crappy house in a crappy neighborhood in Los Angeles. But it was this sort of it was this like in a movie montage, it would be like all these crazy things happening, one to one. I'm working with these, huge multi-platinum acts, like musicians. I'm working with Robert Greene, who's he's writing a book with 50 Cent, and I'm the research assistant. I'm working with Tucker, who's sort of pioneering this new genre of literature and writing a site. And obviously my parents, weren't super fond of me dropping out of college. So there was that stress. It was this crazy time. But it ended up being, I sort of leapfrogged in front of all my peers. So at 21, through Robert Greene, who was on the board of directors of American Apparel, I found myself advising Dov Charney, who's the founder of what was then $1 billion company. And so, at 21, 22, I became the director of marketing there. It was just sort of this crazy, all from one random email from a site that I liked. It set me on a course that I never would have predicted for my life.
So I have to ask about that. As far as getting that role at American Apparel at that age with no resume, no history, is this simply a matter of you sharing ideas, with him, where he's finally these are great, go for it?
Yeah, so it's the same thing. Like when people see the story in retrospect, they go oh, how were you hired to be the director of marketing with American Apparel with no experience? Well, so first off, I had 3 or 4 years of experience working with these cutting edge clients. But what happened was Robert Greene was on the board of directors. I'd been sort of training under him, and Dov was having some sort of new media problems. Let's just call them that, right? Problems with his online reputation. And Robert, he asked the board of directors if they knew how to solve this problem, and they didn't. And Robert said, but I have this kid and I think he might know. And so I ended up meeting Dov. I went to his house. We talked for a whole day, and he was like, look, I think you should come work for me. I didn't have a job title. I didn't have a position. I took a pay cut to do it. And I remember I showed up the first day, and they were the HR person was like, Dov doesn't want you to have an ID badge at the company because he doesn't want anyone to know that you work here. I was it was an off the books, crazy, weird thing that, again, over time, when he would ask my advice on stuff, or he would ask me to tackle projects, is the same thing I did with Tucker. It's when you have a mentor, the mentor says hey, I'm having trouble with this. Can you work on it? And if you show yourself as someone who can sort of tackle insurmountable projects or problems, or be someone who's a solution to things, you start to take on more and more responsibility. When I was at American Apparel, it was early enough in the company that there wasn't an official marketing department. There was this person who worked on this kind of marketing, and this person who worked on social media, and this person who did this. And one of the projects that I took on was combining and concentrating all that, building an actual marketing department for him. And then they needed someone to fill it, and I filled it on an interim basis, and then it eventually became an official basis. So again, it's this idea. I think people want things to be handed to them with a bow on top, they want it to be official and clear. And I've always been able to sort of work with that uncertainty, and I knew hey, nothing bad is going to come from me being working at a company that's got 10,000 employees where I have one direct person that I report to, and it's the owner and CEO of that company. I was just confident I would be able to make something of that opportunity. And it turned out to be something that I wouldn't have anticipated I'd be able to do, but then managed to do it.
So we'll get into some examples of this here when we get into the meat of today's episode on PR, which I'm super excited about. But do you have a core philosophy when it comes to your approach to marketing in general? Is it, again, with American Apparel and the examples that I've seen and that you've talked about, it's fairly in your face, grab your attention, a little bit of shock value to it. So do you have a core philosophy that, if you could sum it up in, a sentence or two when it comes to marketing, that you really live by?
I think a lot of people do boring things, and then they spend a lot of time trying to interest or trick the media into talking about them, right? The reason that most people have to hire a $10,000 or a $20,000 a month publicist to lobby the media on their behalf is because, one, they're incapable about speaking about their own projects. And when they do speak about their own projects, it doesn't capture anyone's interest, right? But I think what I try to sit down and do is actually think about the position that the media is in, right? Your average reporter is sitting there not thinking like, man, there's so much awesome stuff going on. I really can't write about it all. They're actually saying like, everything is so boring. I would love for something amazing to fall in my lap. And so the way I think about it with all my clients, if I had to sort of summarize my marketing philosophy, it's if you do interesting, provocative, sort of shareable things, the media will, like, I remember I did a stunt with a book that was an atheist minister. It was a minister. He'd been a minister for like 25 years, and he became an atheist. He met Richard Dawkins and became an atheist. He was the first. It was called like the Clergy Project, and Richard Dawkins would help preachers who wanted to become atheists. So he wrote this book, and his name's Jerry DeWitt. It's an amazing book called Hope After Faith. And as we were planning the launch for that book, Jerry was like, hey, one of the things I'd like to do at some point, I wanted to know what you thought, I want to have a church service for atheists. Like, why can't atheists get together on Sunday and talk about things? And I was like, that's a brilliant idea. And we ended up setting up an atheist church service in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so the sort of core of the Bible Belt. And I was talking to a friend of mine who worked at the New York Times, and I said, hey, we're doing this thing. Have you heard about this? And he was like, oh my God, could I please come cover it?
So no controversy at all.
Right. Well, it's controversial, but what the lesson I think there is, okay, if you do boring things, you have to put out a press release and beg the New York Times to write about you. Maybe. And they're probably not going to. Meanwhile, you do something that's provocative and interesting and sort of nails a bunch of issues that are sort of circulating in the cultural consciousness. They ask you if they can come, and they ask your permission if they can write about it. Right. And so that's what, I mean, if you look at what Tucker's done, if you look at what American Apparel did sort of at its peak, and you look at a lot of my clients, what we're focusing on is what's the most interesting thing that we're doing that no one else is doing? How do we emphasize that? And it's less about our contacts with the media and more about the fact that if we do it right, it's a seller's market instead of a buyer's market.
Well, so we're really kind of diving into the meat of the subject matter today. So what I'm really excited about this discussion when it comes to PR is the fact that I have never had it really broken down for me before. I've never pursued it in an intentional way as a marketing strategy. And the one time that I did, I hired a nice big PR firm. I paid them 20 to 25 grand. And the grand total result of that a month later is that I had an interview with one of their writers who used that to get background information on me, learn about my story, and essentially write a bio. And the price tag, again, was 25 grand at that point. I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, at least show me a game plan, where we're going to go, what your strategy is on this. And they're like, no, this is kind of how it works. It's going to take 2 or 3 months. And I was like, I'm not paying 75 grand for you guys to figure this out. And so, when I think about PR, I think about Richard Branson. He's the only guy in my mind that I've seen over the course of decades who's used PR to literally serve as the foundation for his career. And in a very selfish, self-serving way, I have a feeling that I have some really big opportunities to do that with my hydro company coming up. And so there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there who are listening to this, small business owners who've never pursued PR before. What do they need to know when it comes to that world?
I think PR works as a strategy when your thing requires social proof in a significant way, right? So your product is going to be a high ticket item. So I want to know if you want to attract an audience that's going to pay for that, they want to know that this thing is legit. So what I typically say with media is not usually the discovery mechanism for things. It's the sort of the confirmation, right? So I'm going to hear about your product because it's a great product and it fills a need that I want. But when I'm deciding to buy your product versus any number of other products, I want to know, has this been vetted by the media in some way? That's typically the role of PR. And the problem is most PR companies don't understand that. They think that PR is sort of lead gen, which it's not. And they don't understand that the media have changed either, right? Most PR people, if you've been in the business for, let's say, 20 years, right? You remember a world in which Austin would have had 2 or 3 competing daily newspapers, which don't exist anymore. Or, New York would have had 10 or 12, and weekly magazines and monthly magazines. And these things would have had a huge circulation. So what's happened is that there's been a massive contraction in the amount of in media, but then also an explosion of media at the same time. So there's a lot fewer traditional outlets, but a lot more untraditional outlets. And so what I think about from a PR standpoint is, okay, what am I actually trying to accomplish for this client? Is it that I'm trying to prove that they're legitimate? Am I trying to advance a certain story through the media? Am I trying to attract a lot of attention? What am I trying to do? And then I think the most critical question that brands and companies have to ask themselves before they engage in PR is there a reasonable market in the media for this product? Like, do people who do things similar to what you're doing typically get written about? And if they don't, then you either need to do something very unusual that gets you written about, or you need to say, like, PR is not for me, right? Like I'm an author. There's not a lot of authors that appear on, late night television. So I don't try to be on late night television, right? Like you want to go where your products are going to be actually interesting to people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so I've heard you break down this into two categories as well. There are, let's just call them the 5-star ultra premium properties out there, New York Times, whatever it may be. And then you've got the blogosphere and the business insiders of the world, the content factories, for lack of a better term. What are the differences between the two, and how do you approach them differently?
Sure. So I'll give you an example of something that happened to me recently. So my book, The Obstacle is the Way, happens to sort of make its way accidentally through professional sports, right? The Patriots read it, the Seahawks read it, a bunch of women's national soccer team players read it, UT, the coach Shaka Smart there, he read it. So it was this true fact, right? Like the book is popular in professional sports. And the end, what's made it more popular in sports is that Sports Illustrated wrote like a 2,000 word article about this book being in professional sports. So how does that happen? How does a true fact go to now a true fact and a media like true fact, like a media narrative? Well, what happened was I was on a podcast like this with a fan of the book, Michelle Trefoya, who's the female anchor on Sunday Night Football. And we were just talking about this, right? It was a podcast for a small audience. And we're talking about this thing, and she's sort of writing about that fact. And then a Patriots blog listened to that podcast and wrote an article about how the Patriots had read the book. So this was like patsfans.com or something like that. And then Sports Illustrated saw that article, and then we talked and they wrote an article about it. So I'm telling this to sort of illustrate the chain, right? I call it trading up the chain. But true fact led to a podcast, which led to a small sort of niche focused blog, which then led to one of the biggest sports media outlets in the world. And then on top of that, now we have social media sharing it and all sorts of things, right? Then the article goes viral and it's been seen a couple 100,000 times. So what I had noticed early on in my career is that exact cycle, right? I noticed at American Apparel, like we'd put out something on social media and then Gawker would pick it up and then CNN would call us. Or a disgruntled employee would file a lawsuit that would get picked up by a wire service that covers court news, which would get picked up by a small blog and then a bigger blog. And so it's this sort of process of how the media finds and develops ideas, right? And like you'll see that someone with Donald Trump has really figured this out. He's like, look, if I pitch the media on things they're not going to talk about, but if I just throw it up on my Facebook page or my Twitter page, it's going to sort of bubble up through the system. And now in the next thing, it's tomorrow's headlines.
Well, so how do you like, I've got to ask, because I mean, I've never experienced that at all,
Sure.
Any of my stuff. So I feel like I'm missing a piece of the puzzle here, or...
Well, so what I'm trying to illustrate, most people haven't experienced that, but that's how the system works, right? In a world where, 20 years ago, a New York Times reporter would have a week to work on a story. Now they have a day, right? And so what this means is that the media is dependent on other lower media outlets to discover things. And so if you can find, like, after my first book came out, this guy did this thing called, did you hear of shipyourенemiesglitter.com? Did you see that?
Yeah.
So that's an illustrative example. So this guy, he has a hilarious idea for a thing called Ship Your Enemies Glitter. He's drunk one night and he decides, like, what's the worst thing I could do to someone that I hate? I'm going to send them an envelope full of glitter. He registers shipyourенemiesglitter.com. He makes a landing page. It's got a shopping cart, but this is not a real business. He owns no envelopes, no glitter, right? He'll take your money, but he doesn't actually know how he's going to deliver the product. And he puts that on Product Hunt, and he puts it on reddit.com/r/startups, so it's r startups, right? So those are two tiny communities online that happen to have a lot of journalistic interest in them, because there's a lot of bloggers who cover startups for a living. So what he did is he instead of trying to pitch these pitch these reporters who are very busy and get a lot of pitches, right? He said, where are they looking and how can I sort of pop up on their radar? That's trading up the chain in essence, right? So what he's really doing then is, instead of going where everyone else is, he's saying, what sort of legitimacy can I get on my own? How can I introduce this narrative into the world and then let other people pick it up because it's so interesting and provocative, rather than hiring a PR firm to do this for me? Does that make sense? He made so much money from that thing. He sold the site for $100,000 a week after it launched.
You know what is occurring to me as far as why I've never really pursued this? It's because it feels like I have zero control over the outcome. So like it's dependent upon other people and their interest in whatever I'm doing. And I have, I can push it out there and I can try to get them interested in it. But if my control ends there, as opposed to I have full control over like my paid media buys and my advertising campaigns, it's like that's where my focus should be.
Yeah, sure. And I think these things work as a function of each other typically. Like I wouldn't say you just do this and you don't do the others. But it's like a viral video in the sense that you got to make the best video you can. You know what factors tend to increase that virality. But at a certain point, you're putting on YouTube and hoping that the right people see it, right? Now, you can also typically you could study other viral videos and go, okay, what sites tend to be great discoverers of viral content? What sites have kicked off other similar videos in the past? And how instead of just throwing this up there and hoping it randomly happens, how can I I like to think about like, what are the radars that I need to appear on? And that if I have the right product for the right audience, the two will combine and create sort of a spectacular success. Now, there are plenty of things that get tons of attention online and sell zero products. And there's tons of things that sell tons of products online and sort of in the online marketing space that nobody's ever heard of. And because no one's ever heard of it, a huge potential audience for them is convinced that it's a scam.
Well, welcome to my world.
Sure.
Yeah. So, if I'm putting out some really good quality content that I think will just be truly valuable to entrepreneurs, let's just say, this episode or some of the episodes of Self-Made Man or whatever it may be, should I take it upon myself to reach out and to build a short list of, writers or names at properties that I would like to get it featured on and say, hey, check this out? Or is that perceived as someone saying, hey, will you be my mentor, and like delete, right?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's interesting to me how often people say they want more media attention. And then I say like, well, who would you like to write about you? And they go like, I don't know. And it's like, well, then what are you actually hoping? Like you have this wish, but you haven't taken any concrete steps into identifying or zeroing in on that goal. So like with American Apparel, it was like, I knew like these are the 20 writers or so that tend to be tastemakers or influencers in our space that tend to break stories, that tend to cover this beat really well, that seem to respond well to tips. And then if I'm launching a new ad campaign, I know this is someone that I'm either emailing directly or I'm going to make sure that this piece of content mysteriously makes it into their email inbox.
Okay, so now with that being said, is there a hierarchy? Let's say you've got a truly newsworthy story, and I'm just going to use, for lack of a better term or example here, I'm just going to use the hydro business, right? And sure. You saw a picture of it at lunch today. I think it's fairly newsworthy. It's never been seen before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. It's going to have a pretty mass market appeal. So a newsworthy piece. My goal, I would love it to get featured on the cover of some major magazines. With that being said, is there going to be competition to sell the story? Meaning, and this is an example we see in the podcast world all the time, right? Like when Damon John came out with his book, he's on the podcast roadshow. He's going to do 50 podcasts. And so for me, I was like, if I'm not in the first 5, I don't have an interest in doing it because it's just on repeat at that point. Is there a similar phenomena in the PR world and in the media world where you can approach, let's say, the top 5 magazines and say, hey, do you want this story? And trying to get confirmation in that way.
So it's a little bit the opposite in the media world because a podcast is usually like a one-man shop, right? Whereas media outlets are all about scale. They're trying to, and there's no real marginal cost for each additional article that they write. So that's why you see You go on Google News and you'll look at a headline and it'll be like 423 other articles, right? So that's 400 outlets who are covering the exact same thing, essentially in the exact same way, with no original reporting whatsoever. So actually what you find in the media world is that if you can, Michael Citrick, who's a PR expert, he wrote this amazing book whose title is now escaping me. But he calls it sort of, you want to find your lead steer, right? So like a stampede is led by one bull or one cow that gets scared and runs in that direction, and the other ones sort of follow it, right?
And so everybody else just echoes that original piece.
Yeah, right. So like with Ship Your Enemies Glitter, he launches it on the site, and one person writes about it, it starts to do well, and then other people go like, oh crap, there's easy page views in this for me. So what I would think about for you with this idea, it's, so you're launching, or let's say you're launching it on Kickstarter, you're launching it somewhere. What I would think about is, okay, this is potentially a big story because there's some technological breakthroughs, trying to raise a ton of money, you're doing all this stuff. I would think, okay, if I'm thinking about my lead steer here, how can I make sure that the lead steer kicks off this sort of, stampede or narrative with as much of the right material and facts as you could have? Like, so it's like, do you want to throw it up on Kickstarter and have a random lazy writer write about it and potentially get stuff wrong or not sell you as well as you think you could? Or do you want to develop a relationship with the right writer or a contributor to a site who's going to actually sit down and look at the product and touch it? Like you might be better off, instead of pitching, an actual reporter at Fast Company, finding a contributor to Forbes who lives in Austin, who's going to come to your house and spend 2 hours walking through it with you. They might not have the same media cachet as a reporter for the New York Times, let's say, but they're going to kick this sort of thing off in the best possible light for you. So, like I remember I did a stunt with Tucker, and again, this is a deliberately provocative one, but we tried to name a Planned Parenthood clinic after him. He had a joke in one of his books where he says, like, I've paid for so many women to get abortions, they should name a Planned Parenthood clinic after me. And so I was joking, and I was like, well, what if you actually did that? Like, what could the naming rights of one clinic possibly cost? And it turns out it was like $250,000 or something. And so we explored it, and they were into the idea at first, and then they kind of figured out who he was, and they were like, actually, we don't want your money. Like, please tear up the check. So when we were thinking about who was going to break this story, one of the things we were really worried about is, like, if this was presented as a publicity stunt from day one by the media, it's going to be interpreted very differently than it would be like, why is Planned Parenthood turning this money down? So it's like every event has multiple interpretations. We want our interpretation to be the one that people talk about. So as we were thinking about who we were getting to write about it, ultimately what we decided is that I was the best person to write about it. And this is possible in the 21st century media world. So I wrote an article about it for Forbes, and you can look at the headline and it says, why did Planned Parenthood turn down $500,000? So there's like an element of mystery there. There's some signaling that this is not like some minor deal, like $500,000, a lot of money. Forbes, established media brand. So on the one hand, it's an interesting story and you can read it. But on the other, if you think about it from a media perspective, what I'm doing is that article is the press release, right? So instead of pitching it and then filtering it through a media outlet is allowing me to write it myself. And that first person narrative is what kicks it off and creates the angle that we at least wanted or were hoping would go down.
So that leads me to the question is, you've got the saying that there's no such thing as bad press. Is that the case or not?
There is such thing as bad press. Anyone who's ever been accused of like any serious criminal activity, unjustly so, can tell you it did not help their career, right? So it's not that there's no such thing as bad press. It's that I think the definition of controversy needs to be expanded. So like people go like, well, I don't want to be controversial. And it's like, well, if you're not controversial, what are you, right? There's like, vegetarianism is controversial to people who eat meat, right? It's not unethical. It's not shameful. It's just like, hey, if you're not taking a stand about something, what are you doing?
Lion hunting.
Yeah. So it's like, I think that if you're, here's the way I would say it. Being boring carries a premium to it. And you have to pay more money in advertising and marketing and other things if you're boring. If you're willing to do what Tucker did, you can get boatloads of free press. Now, it's certainly a spectrum. And if you were to ask him, I think he's come to regret some of it, right? And because of what he ultimately decided to do with his career after that. But the way to think about it is, okay, like what sacred cows am I okay attacking? Would I not mind getting press for? Like if you're a yoga studio, you know, you don't want to be controversial the way that American Apparel wants to be controversial, but you might be okay on some other topic, right? So it's about your personal comfort level, but I don't think like pissing people off for the sake of pissing people off is the right thing to do. One of American Apparel's most people think that, you know, American Apparel is all about sex. One of our most controversial campaigns was we used a 64-year-old model named Jackie who was sort of dressed in American Apparel clothes, but in an elegant, sort of classy, like matronly way, right? And that campaign came out. I spent $1,500 in ads for it. And a week later, she was on like Good Morning America talking about it.
So I definitely wanted to get into this. Let's dive into this in a little bit more detail because you're hacking the PR system in a brilliant way that I didn't think of. And you're, again, spending $1,500 and you're getting hundreds of thousands, if not more, millions of dollars in press, where there's definitely some genius behind this strategy.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I sat down at American Apparel and realized is like at the most basic level, you make an ad and then you have to pay people to see it. And since most ads are boring, people don't want to see it for free. Like we skip through most commercials, right? But then on the Super Bowl, we watch lots of commercials willingly, and then we talk about them on the media and on YouTube afterwards and stuff. So it's like some commercials we love talking about, some ads we like, most ads we hate. And so what I realized is that if an ad becomes something that people actually like, if it's interesting or unusual or unexpected or weird or whatever, people will share it and talk about it for free, especially online. So what we sort of at one point we generated so much attention and demand for American Apparel ads that we had this section on our website, it was like americanapparel.com/ads, where we would post our ad campaigns and people would look at them and write about them for free. And there was so much attention there. Sometimes we would put up ads that we were just thinking about doing, and media would write about them as though they existed, even though no one had ever seen them in real life. And so like some of our, I would say, you know, if I asked your average person to think of an American Apparel ad, they'd probably pick one where a woman isn't wearing very many clothes. But like I did this one with dogs, like where it was a dog wearing like an American Apparel shirt. We made dog clothes.
Puppy love.
Yeah, it said puppy love, and then one just said like doggy style. Right. So it's just like a funny, like companies don't do that. And so that got shared all over the internet and people talked about it. And there was like a big feature in Ad Age about it, because not only was it provocative in terms of its styling, but it was one of the first major brands to do an ad campaign on YouTube, which wasn't happening then. There was this line like, who's ever going to advertise on videos of skateboarding dogs? That was like the business media's dig against YouTube. And I remember I saw that and I thought, well, we sell dog clothes. Like I would pay for that. And so I bought like, $2,000 or $3,000 worth of ads on that skateboarding dog video. And then YouTube loved it so much, they pitched the story to me. They pitched the story to Ad Age for me. Or this ad with Jackie. It's the photographer, her name is Marsha Brady. She took it and she was like, obviously we can't use this, right? Like this doesn't work for anything. And I said like, look, there's a blog called Advanced Style, which is this amazing fashion blog that features stylish old people. Why don't we buy an ad there? And the media will write about it because it's so unexpected for American Apparel. And it ended up getting, millions and millions of dollars worth of free publicity. And the actual ad spend was microscopic compared to the amount of attention it got.
No, I think it's brilliant. Like you're producing ads not for the end consumer. Essentially, you're producing them first for the media, which then eventually gets into the mass consumer's hands.
Yeah. So there's this book by Daniel Boorstin called The Image, and it's a very critical book, and I agree with him, but I also sort of exploit it. But he calls it the pseudo event, right? If you think about like what a press conference is, that's a politician calling a bunch of reporters to perform for them and then through them reach the public, right? Or a press release or a premiere party. These are events that, yes, they exist, but their exclusive purpose is to get media attention to then reach the public. And so advertising is a pseudo event if you do it right.
So is there ever a time or a place when you would hire a PR firm? And if so, what do you need to know?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with PR firms many times myself, even with my own books, even though I own a book marketing company. When I'm utilizing a PR firm, It's not to develop messaging. It's not to improve my product. It's exclusively for the relationships that they would have with media outlets that I would have trouble getting to. So I see them as expensive and connected Rolodexes. And that is, I don't see that as an insult. I see that that's a highly specialized skill or a highly specialized bit of access that you have to pay for if you want. So like when I look at all my successful products that were products or projects that were successful in the media, the product did most of the heavy lifting. And then there might have been some strategic PR payments in terms of hiring a firm who's really, again, just giving us access to certain people.
So what should someone in my shoes do? Let's say you're a solo entrepreneur, you've got a small firm, you've never really pursued PR before. You want to explore the benefits that you could get from that, but it seems to me like you're walking in unprepared into an area filled with landmines where you're going to pay a really high stupid tax.
So do you mean for like the hydroponics company?
Really any business, all of the entrepreneurs who are listening to this now who've never pursued PR, if you were going to pick up the phone and call a firm, I feel like I'm going to get burned.
So one of the I think the big myths of PR though is that most people's size but the nature of their product make it so the best person to pitch their thing is actually them, right? So it's like you have a podcast, it's successful. But if somebody called up the New York Times and said, hey, like I want you to talk to this guy, Mike, he's got this podcast. Like, who is this guy? Right. But if you called that reporter and you said, hey, I'm Mike, this is my podcast. It's on this many millions of downloads. Here's some crazy trend I'm noticing in this industry that I think you should be aware of. Right. That is a fundamentally different and more attractive pitch. So I get lots of media pitches because I also write for outlets. So I see this all the time. And you see, like I see, especially with authors, these are unknown authors writing very small books on very niche topics, and they have a publicist pitching on their behalf, and it's a total waste of time. And in most cases, the person who's best disposed to pitch you is you, because you care about it more, you know about it more. It will seem more authentic and real if it's coming from you. But people don't want to do the research, right? They don't actually want to know which outlets to talk to, how to pitch them, et cetera, et cetera.
A great example of this is me getting pitched for people to come on to the show.
Sure. And
at least 2 or 3 times a week, I get emails from, I'm assuming, publicists who are saying, here's the 5 reasons you should have so-and-so on your show. He's done this, that, and this is his new book coming out. And I've never accepted one of those people, and I most likely never will, because if that person doesn't even know who I am or what my show is and can't take 10 minutes to write me an email, then whatever. I'm just another person on that PR person's Rolodex trying to get that person press, and I'm not pimping my show out for that, right?
Yeah, and look, to some degree, that's like a status thing, right? If one of Obama's people reached out to you, you'd be like, of course, right? So you have to be very aware of where you are on the spectrum when you're pitching things. And usually when you're on the low end of the spectrum, it's better that it comes across as human and real rather than fake and transactional. And so that's the big mistake that most people make, especially when you're selling your own thing.
And one of the other things that you mentioned just a minute ago, and I want to make sure people understood this because it was very subtle, is that you positioned it when you're approaching, these companies or these firms or these outlets with something of value. So you're not saying, hey, here's what you can do for me, or here's what I want from you. You're saying, hey, here's what I have, and here's how you can benefit from it as well, with the understanding that ultimately they're after attention and page views because that's how they make their money. And so you're coming to them with an opportunity to generate those.
Yeah. Look, one of the laws of power from Robert Greene is always appeal to self-interest, never mercy or gratitude, right? And so many people go like, oh, I just love my book. Like, would you please write about me? And you're like, we're not friends, right? But if you're saying like, look, this is about this topic that has this kind of audience, I'm going to hustle the shit out of it. These are things that work out for people. Another good media hack, this actually, Tim Ferriss has an article called like Hacking Kickstarter, written by Mike Del Ponte, who did Soma Water. And one of the things he was talking about from a media perspective is like, okay, let's say you want to be written about by Joe Smith, who writes for TechCrunch. Well, what you do is you take Joe Smith's name, and I use this myself now because I pitch on behalf of me and other people all the time. You go Joe Smith, you type him into Facebook, you type him into LinkedIn, and you type him into Twitter, and you see what mutual friends do you have. So like, let's say I wanted to be on your show, and this is actually how we got connected, right? Yeah. It was accidental, but it's the same thing. Somebody who knew you connected us, and you were much more...
the door's open.
Yeah, you were much more open to that pitch than if I had done it unsolicited, and you would have definitely been closed if, Sally's PR firm said like, hey, you got to have Ryan on your show. Here's the 5 reasons. So you look for the people you want to be connected with. And if you're a good networker and you're out there in the world, chances are you're probably only, like Facebook just did a study that said we're 5 degrees removed from every person in the world. It's not 6 degrees, it's 5 degrees, maybe less. So chances are you are connected in one way or another to at least some of the media outlets that you want. Like I get this all the time. People are like, how should I get a book deal? Or how do I find a book agent? And it's like, the advice is really simple. Open your 5 favorite books, go to the acknowledgements, see what agents are thanked, and then see what agent you have the best in with due to the people that you know, and then you email them. It's not like agents are sitting around looking for books they can sell, and reporters are sitting around looking for stories that are going to do well. That's their job.
All right. So how do you measure return when it comes to PR? What are the different ways that you can measure that? Because let's just say I'm investing in a professional team and I'm investing 10 to 15 grand a month. The ultimate expectation is that that's going to produce sales and revenue for my business, or ultimately I have to bring that expense to an end. Sure. So what kind of feedback and advice do you have around that?
So I think just generally when you just hire a consultant or a contractor to just generally do a thing, you don't have much success, right? So if you're like, hey, I'd just like you to get PR, that you've already started the relationship off from the wrong foot. The first publicist I ever worked with, his name is Mark Fortier. He's done Tim Ferriss's books. He did my books, lots of other great books. The campaign we worked out was called the Top 20 campaign. I gave him the 20 outlets that I wanted to be on, and he pitched only those 20 outlets and focused exclusively his energy on those outlets. And, he probably got on 8 or 9 of them, right? Which is a great hit rate. And so the thinking there is, like, if you identify some specific deliverables or goals, you eliminate, think about it. It's like you hire a consultant. They can either fix your problems, or they can spend a lot of time making graphs for you and presentations for you and being on the phone with you. I see this as a consultant. It's like they want, like, let's do a weekly phone call. We'll talk on the phone every 2 hours. It's like, or you could empower me to get the results that you want and then be either happy or dissatisfied with the results as I provide them. So I think a lot of people are not comfortable, like they want everything, and as a result, they get almost nothing. So I think the first thing is to really zero in on some deliverables and be very prioritized in what you want, and be okay understanding that there's trade-offs. Like you're going to not get other things. So I think that's number one. I think the other part is making sure that you don't see PR in a vacuum, right? You're not trying to get on TechCrunch exclusively to sell a lot or to raise a lot on Kickstarter. You're understanding that if you get here, it's going to make your paid advertising that much more effective and your mailings that much more effective. And it's going to help your platform, convert better. So it's understanding that it's a piece of the puzzle. Like when we worked on Tucker's movie, we got all sorts of this provocative, crazy press, like much more than anyone ever could have expected, but it had a very minuscule paid budget, which is how movies have big opening weekends. They spend tens of millions of dollars advertising them. And so it just didn't deliver the way that we really wanted it to. So I think understanding that it's not a vacuum. And then 2, like, what are you hoping people do when they read this article, right? Like, are you hoping they've heard about you? Well, okay, then, if it's there, you've accomplished that goal. Or are you hoping they go to a thing to buy an offer, right? Like you can affect on your end, what do people see when they Google you or come up to you? Like, what are you hoping they do? And having a pretty clear call to action with your thing. I think people who are just doing a lot of PR is just vanity. They're like, well, I just want people to know that I exist. And it's really hard to know whether that's worth it or not. But if you're like, hey, I'm going to be in this city on this day and I need to sell 1,000 tickets, that's a clearer, easier, and more measurable goal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, we've got about 10 minutes left here. What else should people know when it comes to this topic? Maybe, a first step or two. And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but just to kind of recap and sum it up, on here's the first or second thing that I would do if I'm really wanting to strategically pursue PR for my business?
Yeah, I think the big thing that I see over and over again is people are not willing to objectively look at their own product and their own offer, and they don't understand that is the biggest impediment to them getting the sort of attention that they want. You know, there's a great quote from Mark Andreessen where he's saying, like, you basically have to do anything and everything to get to product market fit, right? It just doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if you have to raise another round of capital, you have to change your name, all this stuff. If you don't have it, nothing else matters. And I think that's people go like, oh yeah, my thing's great. Now tell me how to get lots of media attention. And then when I go, look, as an objective third party here, I don't think it's that great. And I don't think people are going to be that interested. That's when, you know, they put their fingers in their ear and they go hire someone else. Right. And so that is the hardest thing to do is you have to, does this actually have what it takes? And then I think the second part is you need to do as much of the groundwork and research on your end as humanly possible. You want to know who you're going after, what kind of outlets you want, what do they really write about? Like people go like, okay, I get your trading up the chain theory. What outlets matter? And it's like, I don't make pocket protectors. Like, how would I know? Right? Like, I'm not into hydroponics, so I don't know what the big outlets in your space are. But you should know because you should be living and breathing this stuff. And so people think that it's like, no, my job was just to make this product. And then it's somebody else's job to make it popular. And that's just really not how it goes. So those would be the two big things I would think about.
That's great. This has been super valuable. It's my head's just spinning on this topic. And, you know, interestingly, and I'm going to link this up for you guys in the show notes, but Ryan's got an awesome course that he filmed a couple of years ago on Creative Live on this exact topic. And as I was, you know, getting ready for today's interview, I bought the course and I sat here for an hour watching it. And I was like, we have to talk about this because this is awesome. And nobody can speak from it that I've ever met from a real experiential level. So, you know, with you and what you've got going on now, I've had a question in my head that I've been wanting to ask you for the last hour, which is, where is your biggest passion personally? Do you consider yourself an author first and foremost and a marketer second, or a marketer first and an author second?
So the way I think about it is that writing is very fulfilling for me, but not as stimulating as I would like it to be. And marketing and the stuff we've been talking about is very stimulating. Like you can see, I'm excited, but I don't want to say it's empty, but it's not as fulfilling as I want it to be. And so I do both, right? Like I wake up in the morning and I write and I think until I can't write and think anymore. And then the rest of the day is working with clients on their things, taking the things that they're passionate about that are fulfilling to them and helping them reach like a larger audience. So I sort of split it that way. I wish I could just do one, like energy wise, it would probably be better for me. But like I like to do both. So I love writing. I love thinking about these things more than I love like having to show up at a company and, you know, sell something that ultimately I don't control. What's really nice about my writing is like I am in complete control and I have to listen to my own advice when it comes to marketing and selling that stuff.
Now, I know you've been taking clients and helping, you know, firms with their marketing campaigns, with their PR strategies. That's something that you're still doing?
Yeah. Yeah, so we work with all sorts of companies. We work with authors. So we did Tim Ferriss's books. We did Tony Robbins' last book. I've done Robert Greene's last two books. I worked with Tucker when he was writing. So I work with a lot of authors, and then I work with companies. Actually, I did a bunch of consulting for Creative Live, New York Observer, which is a big media outlet, Complex Magazine, one of the biggest publishers in the world. Done stuff for Google. So we do a lot of all the stuff that we're thinking about or that we talked about here. It's sort of easy to talk about in theory. Where it starts to get difficult, and then where my company comes in is like, okay, how do I do it for this specific product? What is the best way to grow this podcast or this author's personality or their platform? Or how do we blow up, you know, this unusual product for this client? That's where the consulting and advising, more hands-on stuff comes in. So my company's called Brass Check. It's a remote firm. I've got partners all over the country, and then we just sort of dig in on very specific projects. And you know, when I'm saying most people aren't able to be objective about what they do, that means like we say no to like 90% of the people that approach us, but the ones that we do work with are interested in sort of doing this hard work.
Very cool. And one of my favorite questions to ask guests on the show recently has been, really what is your biggest problem or challenge that you have in life right now, and what do you need help with most?
My biggest problem is I would say it's more of a personal one. I have a lot of trouble saying no. So like I love what I do, so I want to do it all the time, right? Like I love speaking, so like if I didn't have a speaking agent, I would say yes to everything and I would do it all for free. And I would say yes to every writing project, regardless of, the sort of cost benefit calculation, all this stuff. So for me, it's like, I think it's partly because I'm young, partly because I'm very high energy, but like it's being able to say like, this is a great opportunity, but it's not the right one right now, and a better one will come along. You mentioned Richard Branson. He has this quote where he's like, opportunities are like buses. There's always another one coming around. That's very easy to say in theory. And then in practice, like to be able to say like, no, like I think one of the hardest things for people to do is turn down money, right? And so to say like, actually, I'm going to say no to that because I expect there's something better in the future. That's very hard for me to do personally and personality wise. And so it's something I've spent a lot of time trying to work on. It's a good problem.
Well, we can trade because I have the opposite one. Like I am such an introvert that and I'm single-minded focused on whatever I'm working on, that any other opportunities or things that come along, even if there is money attached, I'm like, no, because it's just, I'm going to feel that level of pressure and stress that much more intensely that I just kind of turtle and I go in the shell and I'm like, go away. Yeah. So that's interesting.
Yeah, like for me, it'll be like, oh, you want to do this thing in October? It's like October is months from now, of course. Yeah. And then it'll be like, wait, did I commit to doing one thing every day for 30 days in a row in October? Like I'm going to kill myself, right? And so I end up saying yes, and then I have to painfully say no later instead of just being upfront and honest with people, and with being more importantly, being honest with myself about what I actually want and don't want. That it just takes discipline, and I'm having to work on it.
Well, is the solution to that being really clear on what your goals are right now, so that you can say, is this going to move me towards that goal or not?
Yeah, there's a Robert Louis Stevenson quote where he's like saying, knowing what you want is the first step to wisdom and old age. And it's like, yeah, like that's a great opportunity for somebody else, but it's not what I want. And I think you've got to, part of strategy is knowing like what you're ultimately trying to accomplish. So you're able to say like, no, thank you, right? Not like, no, I would never do that, but more like, hey, that's a distraction from my ultimate purpose or my larger goal. And it's always harder to say no in the moment, but almost always better off if you do.
Yeah, very true. Very true. So this has been awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much. And I'm going to link up to your courses on Creative Live. And it's funny, literally in an hour, I'm interviewing Chase Jarvis, who's the founder of Creative Live. So it's amazing how everything's been so intertwined today. But this is awesome. You've got some books coming out. I don't know if you want to mention those now, or if, later we can have you on again when it gets closer to launch, if they're still kind of in top secret mode, or is there something you want to mention about those?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'd love to talk about the new book when it comes out, but it comes out in June, and it's called Ego is the Enemy, and it's a sequel to my last book, which is called The Obstacle is the Way.
Very cool. Well, Ryan Holiday, thank you so much for joining us here on Self-Made Man, and thank you guys once again for listening. If you got some value from this show, which I'm sure you did, please share it with those your friends and colleagues, and thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.